welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Beth Schill and I work at the Cawley Career Center at Georgetown. And we work with primarily undergraduate students, but we also work with everyone who has an interest in kind of learning more about their careers. And I'm excited to welcome you all today to our panel on Hoyas in government relations. So we've got a fantastic group of alumni who have decided, who have agreed to come chat with you all this evening about their careers in government relations. And maybe one of your questions might be even, what is government relations? And I think you'll find from hearing about their career journeys that it is a varied field. It means a lot of different things and a lot of different activities, and so we'll give everybody a chance to just introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of go right into Q&A. So if you have questions, what we'll do is I'll go ahead once everyone's finished with their introductions. We'll have you kind of put them in the chat, and then we'll kind of go in the order in which I see the questions in chat, and you can come off the mic and turn on your video and ask your question. But we really hope to make this more of a conversation so you all can learn from our awesome alumni and their journeys. So yeah, so thank you. Thank you, Sean, Queen, Izzy, and Jenny for joining us today on this lovely April showers day or week. And so thank you for joining us. So would anybody like to introduce themselves first?
Ladies first.
Well, I guess I can go. I'm Queen Adesui. I use she, her pronouns. I graduated from the college in 2016. I was an American Studies major and a Women's and Gender Studies minor while at Georgetown. Right now, I'm a senior national policy manager with the Drug Policy Alliance, which is a national advocacy organization working to end the war on drugs. So while at DPA and currently at DPA, I do a lot of coordinating and management of efforts looking to change laws related to drug policy, but also I do a lot of base building and organizing work. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more about how I'm able to merge kind of lobbying and broad advocacy efforts with more on the ground grassroots organizing.
Hi, Hoyas. My name is Jenny Smallson. I'm a graduate of the School of Languages and Linguistics, which doesn't exist anymore. And I probably graduated before many of you were born. But I was a French major at Georgetown, and I minored in international relations. My job now, I work for you. I work for the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities, and we represent the 27 U.S. And one junior college in Belize, Jesuit colleges all across the country. And we really advocate for policies that ensure that all students could really benefit from a Jesuit education. So we're big advocates for the Pell Grant program, campus-based aid programs, DACA, deferred action for childhood arrivals, and other policies that serve students and serve institutions. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions. That's my landing place now, and I've had time on the Hill. I spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill as a congressional staffer or professional staffer, and led me to here. So I'm excited to hear your questions and answer them all as best I can.
Wonderful. And Sean or Izzy?
Go Izzy.
Oh, I was suggesting that you go ahead, but thanks, Sean, and great to be with you all. I'm Izzy Klein. I graduated Georgetown College in 1999, so I'm old. I've got I majored in government and theology, sort of from the time I got to campus, I intern like many of you on the Hill and in campaigns, and worked on the Hill in campaigns for about 13 years or so, and moved into the multi-client lobbying space when Obama was inaugurated president, in January of 2009, and have been doing that since. And we represent a range of clients, companies, nonprofits, trade associations, and it's a lot of fun. We have good folks that we get to work with every day, and I kind of get to still get my political fix by in my spare time, working with groups like the Jewish Democratic Council and individual candidates all over the country. So it's great to talk to you about our experiences, and thank you again for making time and for having me, Beth.
So my name's Sean Todd. I graduated in 1989, the bicentennial year of Georgetown. I guess that makes me the senior person on the panel. It pains me to say that out loud, but it's true. It's inevitable. So my career path, I was school foreign service and always thought I would join the State Department and become a foreign service officer. I never got past that pesky 8-hour oral exam, but as most things turned out, just fine. I've had a very nonlinear career path. I was a high school teacher and middle school teacher for 4 years. I worked construction a couple summers. I was unemployed when I got married at age 25. I was probably the oldest intern on Capitol Hill, and then sort of stumbled into how I found my thing in lobbying was moving to Southern California after college. And I really kind of was hit by the green bug in Los Angeles. If you've ever flown into LAX, there's this brown cloud that sits over the city. And I really, I wasn't aware of environmental issues while I was at Georgetown, but really was struck by, signs on the beach that said, "Do not go in the ocean, you will become violently ill," and jogging at night after work and just choking on car fumes. So I moved back to DC in '92 and worked on environmentalists for Clinton Gore, which sort of led eventually to this job in lobbying. And the other thing I'll finish with this introduction is I really didn't figure it out till I was about 34 years old. So things tend to work out. I'll stop there, just to go right to Q&A then.
Yeah. So to get us started, so again, students, especially for those who just joined, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat and I'll call on folks as I get the questions. But to start out, this idea of government relations or lobbying, there's a lot of connotations with this field. I'm interested to know from each of you what you think is the biggest myth about the field, and then what is the reality to that myth?
I'll jump in. I think a lot of people think of lobbyists as people that go meet with a congressman or congresswoman and sort of persuade them to their position that they're advocating for. And I don't think it usually works out that way. I think usually you find a champion or two and you let them, carry the water on your behalf. Because in terms of personal experiences where I've personally convinced a congressman or senator about my positions on one hand, for sure. So I think that's one myth to start out with.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I actually really was not familiar with what lobbying was, even getting into my job. So I've been in different positions while at the Drug Policy Alliance. I was a policy associate, policy coordinator, policy manager, and I'm now a senior national policy manager. And one myth that I know for sure, something I thought about when I was still in undergrad, was that lobbyists were all suits. They were all people who are paid a lot of money, who are really not that effective. And there actually isn't a connection to advocacy. I never really drew those lines. And I realized that the work that I wanted to do actually, at least in the space that I want to work in, requires lobbying. So I'm effectively, I refer to myself as an advocate that lobbies, not necessarily just a lobbyist. And I actually have a different perspective than Sean. I actually think advocates who lobby are really the backbone of reform. I think oftentimes Congress members and other policymakers I mean, this differs depending on the member or the person, you know, what they're really passionate about. But a lot of reform that happens is really like grunt work done by activists and advocates. The grunt of the work, the research backing Congress members' decision to support something, all the talking points, the persuasion, the pressure points. You know, advocates really are in the trenches when it comes to shifting the narrative in Congress. And I've had that experience being at the forefront of really making, for example, marijuana reform a conversation in Congress, and especially through a racial justice lens, which is where I and my organization come at the issue from. So I've experienced seeing how powerful advocates can be in mobilizing the voices of people when it comes to Congress members and other policymakers. But basically the myth is that not all lobbyists are only representing big corporations or banks. a lot of advocates that lobby represent people.
And you know, I think I align myself with the comments that Queen and Sean made. I would add a little bit along those lines, because I think that the myth that Sean pointed out and that Queen pointed out are sort of a similar one, right? Like, lobbyists convince members of Congress to do things that they would not normally do on behalf of some kind of, you know, awful company or interest group or something like that. And, you know, I actually, you know, and so that's the myth. And so the fact really is that, you know, I see myself as sort of a translator for both companies and trade associations and nonprofits to understand what policymakers are thinking and doing, as much as it is an educator and translator for policymakers who don't maybe understand an industry or an issue or you know, some group that they ought to in order to make better policy. And so, you know, I think that one of the biggest misunderstandings is really that Congress and each person in it has perfect knowledge, you know, is the expert in a given field, in a given committee. And that's just rarely the case, particularly on a range of issues. You know, you can only know so much about the votes that you're taking and the bills that you're kind of, you know, hopefully you know something about the bill that you're writing, but you may not know a ton about the overall issue if you're simply voting on a bill as opposed to writing a bill. So there's a real, I think, knowledge gap that I think Sean and Queen and Jenny and I try to fill on like a daily basis. You know, and some of it is just, you know, being the arms and legs of, you know, for offices that are short staffed, for staff that has a million issues to run down, and presenting things either on behalf of the organizations or on behalf of their constituents, right? Like, we don't, you know, Queen represents a host of activists and advocates who care about better drug policy. You know, I represent 9/11 victims and, you know, refugee relief groups. And, you know, yes, I represent some companies too, but a lot of what we do is based on kind of the constituencies that overlap with the members of Congress who we're talking to. And so making those kind of connections is really kind of critical in you know, in doing the advocacy and the policy work, et cetera. So I talked too long. Sorry, Jenny.
I think I'm gonna I'm clean up for my, you know, opening day analogy, but I think I would say that contrary to television or movies, lobbyists can be humble, and lobbyists are most effective when they work in partnership. So I think what I often will realize is that it's easy to say no to me. I'm a Washington-based person. I'm representing people out there. My best partners are students, are our institutions, are the people working on our campuses. And when I can tell their story or help elevate them or put them front and center to tell a story, that's oftentimes when I realize my best successes. So they're not mine, they're shared, they're ours, because it is complicated. And as Izzy said, we're trying to inform in the best way we can, and we are not experts. But our humility in going to the experts and reaching out to the people who are on our campuses, our students, are the ways that we can be most effective. So you can have lobbyists, contrary to, whatever movie you're watching, that are humble and good partners, and those are the really good ones.
Wonderful. So we do have a kind of a two-part question from Eden, asking a really good question. I see a lot too about kind of what types of organizations make up lobbying and how, as a student, can you enter into the field? So Aiden, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Sure. Awesome. Hi. My name is Aiden. I'm currently a graduate student in the Security Studies program. So my two-part question was essentially, one, does most lobbying come from, I guess, in-house departments within companies and organizations? Or is it more common for it to be done on a collective basis by like trade organizations or like broader based interest group associations? And as a follow-up to that, is it possible to go into lobbying to advocate for like specific like policy positions, issues, organizations, like industries that you care about? Or is it much more likely that you'll be like working for like a firm that has a wide assortment of like clients that they lobby for across like various different industries? Thank you.
Beth, I'll just take a quick shot. Since Aiden, the first part of your question, I think that you can sort of by category divide lobbyists into three categories. In-house lobbyists, as you mentioned. I used to work for a company called International Technology Corporation. It was a for-profit environmental engineering cleanup company. I was an in-house lobbyist. I was the junior lobbyist of a two-person government affairs shop. And then I started my own firm like Izzy 20 years ago, and I became an independent lobbyist, where I am, to use the cliche, a for-hire, a gun, a mercenary. That's the second kind of, for-hire lobbyist. The third kind, I think, is what Jenny and Queen do. They work for a trade association or an interest group, represent either a large industry like Jesuit colleges and universities, or interest group for drug reform, or the Beer Institute, or the nuclear energy industry. Those are the trade association type lobbying groups. So I would categorize it as three, and you guys could probably add on and add other categories. But to answer your second question, Aiden, my firm does concentrate on energy and environmental issues. We kind of do cleanup and clean tech. So I went to grad school at University of Maryland in conservation biology and sustainable development. So most of our clients are in the energy and environmental field. So I think that's sort of a qualified yes to your second question, but maybe Jenny or Queen or Izzy want to add on to that.
I would say the world is your oyster, Aiden. The Washington world is your oyster. There's really, there's not a group that you could name, or an interest or an issue that doesn't have a lobbyist one way or the other. So whether they fall into any one of the categories that Sean mentioned, I think you're right that almost, I think that it's an easy place to follow your heart and find out what your interests are and see what kinds of groups are out there doing that kind of work, because really it's extraordinary how many people are up, whether they're going to the administration or the Hill, or working behind the scenes to tell that story, to make sure that they're informing the discussion and the dialogue, with the in a way that represents the needs of their community.
The only thing I would add to what Jenny and Sean said is to not think of being a lobbyist so rigidly. It's not like not everyone just hires specifically for a lobbyist. I think what makes a person a lobbyist is registering and essentially like being a part of trying to change policies or influence policy. So it's not necessarily that you'll be looking for a job that the title is lobbyist. That can be the case for some situations, but a lot of times lobbying is just a part of the job for, whatever issue area or trade association that you're advocating for. It's really just a part of that. So that's the only thing that really makes me a lobbyist is that I register every year and I disclose my donations and that kind of administrative stuff. But my job itself is not just about lobbyists or not just about lobbying. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I think that not getting too far ahead into the next question, but there are a lot of different flavors in this world, and there are a whole host of tangential organizations that just focus on policy. They write policy papers, and that could be a think tank or another kind of economic policy or other firm or organization. There are people in-house at trade associations and at some lobbying firms who are policy analysts who follow hearings, who help write reports, who kind of dive a little bit deeper on certain issues, research directors, and there's a whole communications component, right? There are tons of PR firms and public affairs firms who they don't lobby, but they do provide support for companies, organizations, et cetera, to affect policy. That's a gray area in the law that I don't love, but it certainly exists. For those of us who register, as all of us I think are, with the House and Senate clerks to tell people what we do and how much we make doing it and all that kind of stuff. That's a hurdle that a lot of people don't want to jump, and I think a lot of people over the years have avoided it. Perhaps with some better enforcement, there'd be less of that. But there's a whole world out there, even beyond the stuff that we do. But I think the one thing that I do want to kind of mention, and somebody else will mention if I don't, is that what makes a good lobbyist or a good individual kind of coming into this space is kind of a real awareness of how the process works, and oftentimes you only get that from working in the Hill, from working in campaigns, from being in the administration, and that's I've talked to a lot of Georgetown and other undergrads over the years, both on campus and off campus and over Zoom, and taught a little class seminar a couple summers ago for the Institute of Politics at Georgetown about lobbying. And I think I never wanted to be a lobbyist when I was a young person. That wasn't what I aspired to. I wanted to be in politics, and I wanted to be in public service, and that's what I did for quite a few years. And that experience that I had when I was ready for a new challenge translated really well into lobbying, government relations, public affairs, et cetera. And so that's what I did. But without the first, 13 years of my career on the Hill and, in campaigns, I would not be here, and I would not be particularly good at the job that I have. And that's something that really, I think that there are some who don't totally appreciate that it's not just what you kind of have mastered on the policy side and all of the kind of knowledge that you've been able to suck up, from your professors at Georgetown and elsewhere. But it's really kind of the network of experience and people that you've kind of developed over the years that makes you, kind of excel, and it helps you to excel in this or any business, quite frankly.
Yeah, and Izzy, you kind of set us up for our next question from Eric pretty perfectly. So Eric, if you would like to come off mute and video and ask your question.
Yeah, happy to. And thanks so much, all of you, for being here and talking to us. And I agree. I mean, I think, Izzy, you definitely covered some of what I was wondering. But, I think my question was more towards, as we're, all considering different options for after graduation, what qualities you would both look for and what qualities tend to make people successful, and point taken about having experience, on the side of policymakers, whether that's on Capitol Hill in a state legislature or somewhere else.
I totally defer to Sean and Jenny and Queen on this one. I spoke a lot. Go ahead, guys.
Go ahead, Sean.
I've been answering first. I don't want to set the pattern here. I would say one thing though. When I first interned or interviewed on the Hill, one of the AA's administrators, this is the old term for chief of staff, he said, sit down there at that typewriter or that computer and write me a paragraph on an issue you care about and try to convince me of a particular position. So the ability to communicate both orally and in writing it goes for almost any industry, but particularly in lobbying as well, government affairs. You have to be able to write crisply, cleanly, persuasively. It's just, you can't underestimate that enough, just how good writing skills are. I think EQ helps too. Your emotional quotient about being liked, being respected, being remembered, that helps as well. But the writing is numero uno.
I would piggyback on that for sure. Really strong writing and communicating skills, and also just understanding different kinds of communication skills as well. I think that is very transferable. I would also add really strong skills around relationship building. Lobbying essentially is being able to manage a lot of relationships. And at least in my space, coalition building, being able to manage coalitions, which I think Jenny spoke a little bit to, the importance of other people even and your actual agenda. And in my space, lobbying on behalf of an advocacy issue, being able to coordinate all different kinds of people is really important. So that takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of person skills. And like Sean said, being likable, I think, is really helpful here. Again, beyond just the skills around being able to research and communicate. Those are the characteristics I would amplify.
And I think it helps to be a good listener and to be a good someone who can ask good questions. Every single time I sit down across a table from a staff person, I have my own agenda. I want to tell my story. I want to convince them of something, but I've got to listen. I've got to be able to listen to them and hear kind of what cues they're saying, what direction they're going. So I might change my argument, make sure I'm getting them the data they need. And I would say curiosity, because I'm learning every single day. I've been in this job for a couple years, and there's so many facets to higher education. There's so many elements to these big laws. It's not just funding. We've been doing a lot of work with student veterans recently. There's deep laws, and you want to have someone that's curious and ready to get their hands dirty and be creative in thinking of solutions that are going to best help the people that you represent, the groups that you represent.
The only thing that I'd add, because I think everybody covered it really well, is this is a business and life generally, like you're going to hear no a lot, and I think, and people are going to disagree with you a lot. And being, patient and polite, but persistent, is really important to be effective. And I think that's something that, I was never a patient person. And I've really developed that skill over the last 12 years or so. And it's, my college me would probably not recognize me now in that way. And so I think it's kind of a learned thing from me at least. But it's something to remember that, you can't be discouraged. And that sort of goes with a whole host of professions, I think, not just ours, but it's just it's a learned skill.
So while we wait for some more questions, I have one about. Yeah, Aiden, go ahead.
Kind of going off of the point Mr. Klein raised about being used to like taking no for an answer, or like at least having no being told to you. What is how are results, I guess, usually measured, especially when you're like speaking to a client about like what you've achieved when you're dealing with Congress, and Congress is famously known for doing nothing. So I was just kind of curious about that.
I mean, I can take just a first swipe since you keyed off of my no. Defining expectations for clients is it's sort of a critical piece of the job. And for me, it's individual clients. For Jenny, it's member schools and other stakeholders. For Queen, it's a whole host of advocates and people who are passionate about drug policy. And for Sean, it's clients too. But like, there are a whole range of personalities and experiences that we get to deal with on a daily basis. I think that force us to be super transparent with what's happening, what we're learning, what we're hearing, and how, and then translate that clearly to our clients and our stakeholders, and then be ready for some pushback. But setting expectations early on is really important, not just to to kind of maintain your clients, but really to be successful. And being able to reevaluate when necessary, and kind of change course, change direction, change strategy. But all of this is really dependent upon how we communicate with not just policymakers, but also with our clients, with ourselves, with our colleagues, et cetera. And doing so in a timely way and clearly, et cetera, either verbally or in writing. So going back to the earlier comment about, writing skills and communication skills, like absolutely critical to be able to do that on a daily basis on a range of issues, kind of constantly.
I think for me, a few ways that I think about metrics and how it kind of works for me and my organization is measuring how much we're actually building out support for something in Congress or another body, whether it's the state legislature. So tangibly, that looks like how many co-sponsors on this bill that we care about are there? Are we increasing the co-sponsors? Have we made this a priority for leadership, or are we actually seeing movement on a bill? So like there are actual tangible metrics beyond even just maintaining relationships with staff and members. So for me, like seeing actual tangible movement on an issue or blocking something that's problematic for my organization or my issue area. So we both work affirmatively to introduce and advance certain issues that are important to the work of ending the war on drugs. So for example, marijuana legalization, or for us, decriminalizing drug possession. But separately, also wanting to make sure that Congress isn't doing really bad things, like wanting to increase the scheduling of fentanyl analogs as a response to the overdose crisis instead of doing what we actually want them to do, like invest in harm reduction. So like the defensive lobbying is one thing, the affirmative lobbying is another thing. And for me and for my organization and others, allied organizations, it's about how successful or effective we are in mitigating our issue within Congress or another body. And a lot of that comes with expertise. So I do think that's a difference where when you come at lobbying from the advocacy perspective, because it's so focused on whatever your issue area is. And there are tangible goals for your organization or the group of people that you represent that can be tracked.
One of my first jobs, my very first job after leaving Georgetown, was for a group called the Congressional Arts Caucus. And we were a membership organization. We had members of Congress paid us dues. And we became legislative assistants sort of for them. So we would provide them information about the federal arts portfolio, the funding for the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, reauthorizing those programs. And we allowed almost anyone to be a member. And people were critical of the Congressional Arts Caucus because we had some members of our Arts Caucus who would vote against arts funding. And people didn't understand that. And sometimes we didn't understand it. And for a while, we had people that would go down to the floor and be leaders in defunding the National Endowment for the Arts. And over time, through education and introducing them to the arts and explaining it a little bit better, we kind of had some of those members stopped going to the floor. Now, some of them we never got to vote our way, but what we did is neutralize them a little bit. And they weren't the ones that were making hay and stirring things up and making a mess. And in a weird way, I would consider that like another victory. So you almost have to look as you're doing this work. There are ways you can measure your success, and Queen really spelled it out. It's co-sponsors or stopping legislation or picking up someone else to get a bill out of committee. But there are a lot of other ways that you can educate policymakers in a way that they, it's very slow incremental change. So that Izzy's right, you got to be patient, and it's slow incremental change, and it doesn't happen overnight, but you can over time look at different other ways that you may have influenced an office or a member, and change that path just a little bit. And I think that's important because you have to keep at it. You build over time, and nothing happens quickly up there. So
I would add, Aiden, that's really important question you asked about metrics. And it can be as simple as whether you got the earmark in the bill for your client or not. That's very all or nothing metric, but it can be a lot more complicated than that as well. And it sort of gets to the heart of why I like lobbying, because every day is different, every issue is different. It's very client specific. My very first client was an cleanup firm, an environmental engineering firm. And so a lot of lobbying has gone from the legislative branch to the executive branch. So this particular task was shaping a request for proposal, a federal contract. It was about addressing the environmental legacy of the Manhattan Project. And so what this company, this 8A firm of the year in California, in order to get on a specific team for the specific contract, they needed to change the terms of the RFP, which said that the fee, the profit of the contract had to be shared among all prime team members. What to my client didn't matter was that he shared the fee. He wanted to be on the specific team. So we campaigned the Department of Energy to eliminate that clause in the RFP that said all team members in the joint venture must share in the fee. So it was a very simple ask, because it was value neutral. It didn't matter to anybody. We got it eliminated. It was a success for our client because he was able to join the Foster Wheeler team for his objective. So that's one metric that's very different than what might you think is a straightforward lobbying job. And I could give you, case studies is the grad school example of how we learn. I could give you a lot more in-depth case study examples about how to measure success. And it's too long for this call. But great question, Aiden.
Thank you.
So a question I see from students a lot is kind of twofold, is really how partisan is DC, especially from where you all sit? And as it comes to students, like, what does that mean in terms of like activities or groups and organizations that students are a part of that sometimes they think may or may not hinder their ability to get into the lobbying space? Like, I get the question a lot, like, oh, if I volunteer for like this congressperson or this campaign, am I, shooting myself in the foot for something in the future?
So I'll jump in on that, since I've got some firsthand experience on this one. Look, I was the president of the college Dems at Georgetown, and in DC. My college roommate was the president of the college Republicans. That's how we operated in the late 90s in Georgetown, and I think that there was a little bit more comedy, not comedy. There was comedy too, but there was comedy in the in the world we operate in. But from those early days, like I really felt it was important to be. You can be a partisan, like you can kind of advocate for your own political views personally, without being kind of unable to work with people on the other side of the aisle. And I think that a lot of folks here in DC now are finding that a little bit hard to do. When we started our firm, 4+ years ago, it was really important for me and my partner to have a bipartisan firm. He's a Republican, and that's for some around this place is sort of hard to grasp. Things have gotten more partisan and more divided over the last 25 years, and I don't think I'm exaggerating on that. Is it the worst it's ever been? I don't know. I mean, there were duels on the floor of the House between the parties, the leaders. So it's not that bad. But there are some elements on both sides that have made it really hard for those in the kind of middle who work across the aisle to work together. And when I say middle, I don't mean the political middle. I mean kind of the folks who are real Democrats and real Republicans who just want to get stuff done and work together, as opposed to kind of just scoring political points. And so it's a challenging environment to work if you want to actually achieve some goals. But I defer to everybody else on their perspectives on that.
I might just say I came up closer to Izzy's time, where there was a lot of bipartisan work that got done. I will just say I've never been a registered Republican, and I worked on the Hill for a Republican senator and never disagreed with him or his policies back in the day. But I think now, as a student, I think you have to be actually extra mindful of that. So I think that is something that people are going to look at. They're going to look at what member of Congress you worked for. Even if it is just an internship, I do think that is something that follows you probably more now than it did before. So I would say give a lot of thought, do a lot of good research on the front end, make sure you're considering again your comfort level in that office, because I do think we are in a different time than we were before. So it could influence your path maybe in a different way than it did for me.
I agree with most of what was said. I do think, from my perspective, a lot of organizations in my world operate in a nonpartisan way, even though they may be perceived to be on either side of the aisle. I think in my experience, I've been lucky enough to work on issues that are either already bipartisan or growing or can be bipartisan. So part of my job is being able to communicate across the aisle, regardless of my own beliefs. So I think when grappling with this, I would want to sit with your own principles and sit with what your beliefs are. And if you truly believe in something, then own it. And I think you just have to live with the decision and make your own beliefs. For me, I wouldn't work anywhere that didn't approve of the beliefs that I publicly claim. So, don't publicly put your beliefs out there if it's not something you're willing to die on, essentially, because it can cut you out of opportunities. But like I said, for me, I wouldn't want an opportunity that came from a place that, thinks that I'm wrong for wanting drug policy reform, for example, which can be seen any kind of way. So, if you're super passionate about it, regardless of where it's at on the aisle, I'd say stand by it. But just recognize that it could lead to limitations.
No doubt, partisanship has gotten so much worse since all of us have been in Washington. But I sort of tend to believe as an eternal optimist, it's not quite as bad as people think. And I'll give you a couple examples. For example, I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I've been working in the nuclear lobbying field for a while, dominated by Republicans, and it's not quite as bad within that nuclear lobbying field that I see. For example, as well on the House Energy and Water Appropriations, Mike Simpson and Marcy Kaptur are the chair and ranking member. They get along very, very well. I think that committee itself has this legacy of subcommittee of really working together across the aisle. In fact, I was at a fundraiser in Ohio for Chairman Hobson, Republican from Ohio, and at the small dinner, he complimented the Democratic staff clerk for an idea that was adopted by his majority. And so there are examples. It doesn't get the headlines. I think the open secret is that most people want it to be less partisanship in the operations of Congress as well. So that's all I have to say about that.
I think go ahead, Queen.
Okay, I was just going to add that I think a major key in all of this is, in terms of being an effective lobbyist, is understanding data and understanding talking points and understanding how to connect dots for different kind of people in support of whoever you're representing or whatever issue you're representing. Because most issues, you know, it's just about how you are able to communicate the issue. And as long as you're, you know, advocating on something that's actually based on evidence, more than likely you should be able to figure out a way or a strategy to bring people to the table. So I think that's all a part of the actual job, which makes it fun. It's exciting work often. You know, it's difficult because politics is politics, and oftentimes it's not even about the data or the actual issue or the evidence. It's about someone wanting to be reelected or like some other like really issue that has nothing to do with what you're actually working on, which again, in my world really sucks when it's like people are dying and like if we can just change our policies, maybe less people would be dying. But in general, I do think it's just a matter of really understanding politics and people and data.
And I would follow up to what everyone just said too. It's not, I think the difference in the way I answered the question was getting in the door versus being effective at the job. So getting in the door, you may run into hurdles depending on, you know, what party you've been aligned with in an internship or something else. But once you get in the door, if that is the job that you're doing, lobbying, whether it's for a nonprofit, whether it's for a firm, you better be able, again, I'm going to go back to that, but you better be a good listener. You better be a good problem solver, and you better be open to figuring out how you work with everyone from every single party, without a doubt.
And just one more note on the getting into the door piece. I do think there are opportunities, and I've seen this happen, where an organization or firm is seeking a person who has had experience on one side of the aisle or the other. I think it really just comes down to being a respectful person. As long as you can move respectfully and like are able to talk to people regardless of their own beliefs. If you are aligned with a certain ideology, or like you have expertise in communicating or working with people from a certain side of the aisle, that can be attractive because, you know, you have that experience. And again, reform often requires bipartisanship. So there is some opportunity to be an expert on creating strategies to effectively communicate or organize people from a certain side of the aisle. So it's not always a bad thing. You just have to really know what you're doing and like lean into what that might be, and also own it. Like, if you know, own your beliefs, but I would say like make sure your beliefs are grounded in evidence, just to be safe.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm looking at the time. We just have a few more minutes. So I was curious if the four of you, have any last words of wisdom for some of our students who are looking to get into the field, especially seeing like the time of year it is and everybody's looking for like jobs after graduation or internships. Yeah.
I'd say call us, because Hoyas love to help Hoyas. So honestly, we'll make our information available. And we've had many Hoya interns in our office, and it's inspiring. You all are, you are curious. You are great communicators. You're great writers, and you're going to change the world. You're going to set the world on fire, and we want to be there to help you. So I would just say lean in also to your Hoya family, because I know that we're all here. We're rooting for you, and we know the extraordinary power you have, and we're excited to help you in any way we can.
Yeah, that's well said, Jenny. I echo that. I also have I think a book that's a little bit old school, but really I learned so much about in this profession. It's called The Lobbyists by Jeff Birnbaum, former Wall Street Journal reporter. Now he's the lobbyist for BGR. I think that book's really good about what the profession's all about. I also don't if you don't know what you're doing as a senior in college, I had no clue. I had no idea what I almost went to China to teach English. So just keep following your instinct, follow your gut. I was 34 before I kind of figured things out. So don't panic.
I would really underscore reaching out to Hoyas, and for seniors or people who are about to graduate, I would recommend trying to get lunch or coffee or virtual kind of setup. And don't be discouraged if you don't get a response back. A lot of times folks are just super busy. It's not like a personal thing. I know I've dropped the ball on emails before, but when I can, I absolutely do respond. And then also I would really consider the ways that student leadership can translate into leadership skills and communication skills and the kind of skills that are necessary for the kind of work that we're all talking about. I saw tangible ways that being a student leader on campus, running a student organization, like really helped me run a coalition. So, being on an executive leadership board, I thought was like a super like tangible way of gaining skills that translate post-grad.
Queen, your comment just triggered my last tip. There is no job system in this country. It's your ability to network is how you get a job. That's all there is in this country.
The only thing that I would add, and Sean sort of hit on it, and so did Queen, is again back to the persistence, with respect to your networking. I think many of us are getting 300-400 emails a day, sometimes more, plus the text and the LinkedIn messages and the Facebook messages and the Signal messages. And, it has become harder and harder to be as responsive as we'd all like to be, particularly to fellow Hoyas. And so I think just being, smart and persistent and polite, and, humorous and understanding, like those are all qualities that are super important. And, I think all of us are, of the kind of disposition that like we absolutely want to be responsive to you all, and sometimes our inboxes are they're overtaken. Our days are crammed with meetings or Zooms or calls, and so checking in again, that's always good. And I think I won't speak for anybody else, but we've already hired 2 Hoya interns for the summer. We pay our interns. They're, in fact, 2 of them, they're both return. They enjoyed it and they wanted to come back. So I think that's, it speaks highly of them. And I think it speaks well of the kinds of experiences that you can get doing this kind of work, even at coming out of school or not quite finishing yet. But I still think that the absolute most valuable experience that you all can get is really with, working on the Hill, working in the administration, volunteering on a campaign, working in the state capitol. Like any of those things will be amazing experiences and will prepare you better for this kind of work that we get to do every day.
Wonderful. Yeah. And for a couple students still on, I'll be sending out your folks' emails to the students who are participating today. So, and LinkedIn profiles. So thank you, the 4 of you, for joining us today. It was a really interesting conversation. I think the hope is that, in future semesters, we'll be doing some kind of event like this, but actually getting some networking as part of it, and chance to like actually practice some of those communication and relationship building skills in person. So, but thank you all for your dedication to your fellow Hoyas, and thank you for all the great work that you do. And we look forward to hosting you, hopefully in person on campus next time. So, and students, thanks for joining us.